No, I would say at that very point in time, we haven't seen so much impact on demand. Actually, it's a bit hard to tell because we're now coming out of basically the summer period where a lot of markets are a bit, I would say, downturned anyhow. So this is now picking up after the vacation period. So, and then last year's a bit hard to compare because of Corona. So it's not that we see it to a high magnitude so far.
Do you think when it does show up, it will be in one segment of the market? I mean, you have Ride, which is a slightly cheaper service than the taxi service. Do you think it shows up in one end of the market more than another?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily on the service types because still also Ride has its price point. But I would assume if we see it, we will see it on the B2C side more than on the B2B side, right? Because if you travel for business, you have a certain need to travel, and normally it's also paid by the company, so there is more likely a bit less price sensitivity. But I would guess we would see it more on the B2C side and then more in the leisure segment.
Can we talk about competition? It's been a fierce market in recent years. Uber clearly going for the winner-takes-all type of mentality out there in terms of its strategy. But you've got many more apps trying to open up and do something similar. And you hear that, word on the street is there's a new app and there's competitive pricing. Some consumers decide to try that. Just how fierce is it when you talk about the competitors?
I think it's very fierce. I think I would not start mobility or ride-hailing app as of today because you have already established infrastructure. There's quite some operational parts that you need to build up, and that's quite some investment. And given the interest rates, I think appetite for starting something new that is loss-making in the beginning is a bit lesser in the market, and also for the foreseeable future. So I would say you need to have a certain size. It's as every marketplace business, it can only operate with a certain size of user base, but then also on the supply side. So therefore, I would say I would be very surprised if a completely new player gains a significant market share position in the next 2 years.
Can a ride-hailing, ride-sharing business as a standalone without the super app landscape behind it be profitable just as a standalone individual business?
I think in general, yes. Right, so I think what we are seeing at the moment is there's still the competitive dynamic and the fight for market shares, which obviously also has an influence on the price as usual in these stages. But I think it definitely can from a unique economic perspective, and that is also what we are striving for to become profitable in the near future. We already see that on a per country basis, and in a lot of countries we are operating in, we are profitable bottom line. And then next step is to basically have that for the full group P&L.
When you look at the competitors, the likes of Uber, for instance, building in extra models around delivery of food, just trying to convey that there are other business models away from the ride-hailing, ride-sharing, what does that mean for you in terms of whether you have to follow them down the same pathway?
I mean, obviously we look into what our competitors are doing, and especially in the recent years, rapid delivery was quite interesting. But for us, it's basically we set ourselves up to basically enable people to make smarter mobility decisions, right? And see that we drive the urban change within the cities, and we don't think we are done there, right? So before venturing out eventually maybe into other types in the future, we still see a lot of potential in the mobility space, not only ride-hailing, but then all the new types of shared mobility with car sharing, e-mopeds, e-scooters, and also public transport, which is quite an important part for that.
Let's talk about penetration, because the growth out there, the numbers, user penetration 15.7% in 2022. In 4 years is expected to grow to 18.3%, which seems low. I don't know anyone out there who hasn't really used a ride-hailing, ride-sharing service, except my parents. Why is the penetration still so low?
I think there's a few things to consider. I mean, it depends a bit where the data is based, because it really works in metropolitan areas, right? As soon as you go into rural areas, you get into that scale problem. You don't have enough demand to have a big supply base, and then obviously there's not enough supply that you can really run the business there. So therefore, we're talking about metropolitan areas. I would assume it might be a bit higher there. And then I think the other part is there's a certain price point to that, right? So and then on the one hand, there is we are basically now the first app that introduced end-to-end booking for public transport in a large region in Germany, in the Rhine area. And so public transport is for most of the mobility apps still out of the picture, but that is massively used. If you look at London alone, how many people are using the tube just because of congestion and so on. So I think this is the one part, and then depends also on the countries. I still think people are very bound to their cars in some countries, and that also might lower that penetration quite a bit. But then again, that's also the potential, because I'm very much believing that cities will change how they operate and allow private car travel within the city. We see first signs. If you look at, for example, in France, you can't drive along the Seine for most of the time anymore. So, and I think this will drive penetration up as well.
You recently expanded into Greece, but when we look at the overall expansion in the industry, which has been at a very fast pace to date, is that slowing down now because of the credit environment, higher cost of capital, pushback from investors about growth plans?
I would say to a certain extent, yes, because you always need to have a certain invest if you enter a market. It does not become profitable from day one. But I think I don't think it will completely dry out, right? Because if there's an interesting market and if there's enough demand, and if you see that there's also then a profitable market to be upcoming, there is a good case to still launch there, right? So it is, I think, mainly about where to focus and where to focus about.
Can I ask you about the drivers as well? Because there's been an industry spat for various different companies, but whether workers should be classed as employees or contractors. Where do you stand on this, and where do you think the debate's going?
So, I mean, the debate is very hot on the European level. For us, and this is how we always operated, we want to be in line with the law, right? So the problem sometimes is that the laws are not made for our current times and are a bit outdated. So we're also trying to work with policymakers to give our input, how the reality looks like, and then come to the best conclusion. So then it's different also on a per market level. So we're constantly checking that we are in line with that, and then basically to see that it makes sense for both sides, right? Because on the one hand, and this is something we are fully supportive of, it's basically drivers need to make a living, and we need also to support them, even though if they are not employed for us. But on the other hand, sometimes it becomes very irrational, right? If you go like full employment status, something different than worker status in the UK, you go, okay, but how is this then going to work? Because they actually want to drive for more than one service, because like the demand is also kind of scattered. So is that then still possible, right? How is this going to be operationalized? And I think there's still quite a few open questions that need to be answered, also from the policymakers.
Hi, I'm Joanna Bersecci, and thank you for watching. You can check out more of our videos by clicking on the boxes on the screen. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more from CNBC International. Thank you for watching.